Be Frank Network. Content on this production is for entertainment and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, nor is it intended to substitute medical treatment or diagnosis. Seek medical help if you believe that you are suffering from a mental illness or are a threat to yourself or others. By using any or all of the information provided, you do so at your own risk. Any application of the material is at the listener's discretion and is his or her sole responsibility.
Having been in the church for years, I have heard many times that we either, one, do not talk about our mental health condition, or two, having a mental health condition reflects a lack of faith in God. Both of those things are very toxic to an individual, whether they be a believer or not. Simply put, if we do not talk about our mental health and we keep it inside, we internalize it to a point of where it can just bring us all the way down. But if we also look at it in light that we do not have enough faith in God, it makes sense of why we would want no one to know, because it would make us seem as the subpar Christian. The truth of the matter is that our mental health is our physical health. You would never hear another Christian say to you, "You have high blood pressure? Well, that's just a lack of faith in God." Or, "You have diabetes? That's just a lack of faith in God." Or, "I'm sorry, you had a heart attack? You must be lacking faith in God." It's simply false. And I would be very leery of someone who proclaimed to be a Christian that had that type of mindset. Shonda Pierce, who is a well-known Christian comedian, went through a bout of depression where her husband, who was an alcoholic, died of alcohol poisoning. And she would stand on stage every night and say something to the effect of, "This concert is brought to you by 400 milligrams of Effexor or 300 milligrams of Wellbutrin." And some people would laugh, but she said that she would get letters all the time saying how she did not need to talk about that she had, if she would just trust God, if she would have faith, that God would bring her out of this. And so her line was, "Well, if all it takes for me to come out of this is to have faith, then why don't you have faith and take your glasses off and drive home?" And it really is truly that we must realize that mental health is not a reflection of our faith. Now, while I'm a Christian counselor, I'm not a nouthetic Christian counselor, in that I don't believe that every mental health condition you have is a result of sin. Let me say that again. I do not believe that every mental health condition that you have is a result of sin. And with that being said, then that opens up a whole new avenue of treatment. It's not a lack of faith in God. It's our physical health. And so we go get treatment. And I would encourage you to not be silent about it. As a matter of fact, to be very intentional about not being silent, because we don't suffer alone. And it might just be that your vulnerability of telling your story helps someone else to realize that it's not a lack of faith, and they in turn get help as well. A lot of times within our depression or anxiety or any other mental health condition, we tend to internalize. And sometimes we go to seek these religious experiences and religious highs that kind of put a Band-Aid on the situation. Now, I'm not trying to say that God would not heal you of these conditions in much the way that God could heal you from any other condition, but simply put, it doesn't always happen that way. And so a lot of times people who are coming out of addiction or coming out of a depression, they will go into these church religious programs and they will become so involved in the church and the things of religion that they become hyper religious, as I would say. But they've just stuck a Band-Aid on the problem. They have not addressed the origin of the issue. And at some point in time, you have to be very intentional and pull that Band-Aid off and keep the coping of worshiping God and being close to Him, but to understand that you must resolve the root of the problem, whatever that problem is. There are things that we deal with, such as bipolar, that you cannot treat with simply trusting in God or even therapy, that it is a biological, chemical issue that can only be resolved with medication. And so once you get to the root of that problem and you treat it, you become well. But so many times we, as I already said, we internalize, and so we must not be the person that just lives in today, but we are very intentional with our day. We have a plan. We know what we're going to do, and we stick to it and do it. One of the greatest pieces of advice, I think, that I give to people is that when you feel depressed and you feel like you don't want to do something, that should be your warning sign that you need to go do it. And once you do it, you're going to feel better. You see, the key to mental health is being intentional. We intentionally go get help, wherever that may be. We intentionally live our lives. If you were diagnosed with diabetes, you would intentionally stop eating certain foods. You would intentionally take your insulin or whatever medication. You would intentionally check your blood sugar. And it's the same way with mental health. We intentionally live to not just get better, but to maintain health. Friend, don't let anyone ever tell you, just trust in God. That sounds like a bold statement coming from a minister, but I would say to you, don't just trust in God, get help. Hey everybody, Doc Brian here, and welcome to Doc Talks, where we talk about people's troubles, trials, tribulations, and hopefully triumphs in life. Today I have with me a guest, Randell Stroud, and he is all the way in Nashville, Tennessee. So Randall, it's good to have you with me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully we can discuss some things which will bring some encouragement to any listeners.
Yeah, that is our goal here, to just be vulnerable and tell our stories so that we can give hope to others.
Absolutely.
So are you originally from the Tennessee area?
Yes. I've traveled all around the United States. I've lived, various places, but I don't know. I guess this is just my headquarters where the good Lord just keeps sending me back here time and time again. But sometimes you don't appreciate your hometown until you go other places and you're like, oh, wow, there are good things about where I'm from,
Yeah.
But who knows where I'll end up next? God only knows, but I'm back here for now.
Yeah. I lived in Nashville for about 2 weeks. That's all I could afford. And then I had to come back home.
It's certainly rising here. Something like, I don't know, close to 100 people a day are moving here from places like California and New York. It's got some good and bad coming with it for sure.
Yeah. Well, I moved there. A buddy of mine lives over in Knoxville, and he got me a job in, I can't even remember the name of it. It's been so long ago. It's one of the nightclubs, and I was in their house band playing bass guitar, and I didn't like the scene,
Knoxville, I actually lived out there in 2016 very briefly, and they have a good college football scene out there with UT. But besides that, it can get a little stale out there.
Yeah. So tell me about your home life. Do you have brothers, sisters?
So growing up, I have a twin sister. I didn't show up on the ultrasound,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of came out as a surprise, and people thought that my mom just had a lot of water retention. So I was a surprise. I have an older brother, and I have a half sister that my father had in a previous relationship before he met my mother.
Gotcha. So what was it like having a twin?
It's interesting. Me and her are still quite close. I joke around and say that she's the good twin. I'm the evil twin. I only say that because she's great. She's always sort of been the conscience of the family. Just like in our political sphere right now, there's all kinds of extreme elements. And even in my own life, I've had a tendency to kind of swing way over here and then way over here and sort of explore my belief system. Whereas my sister's always sort of been that stable horse that's been able to kind of look at everything within our family and not pick sides and sort of be that peace element, which is a good thing. But I also feel sorry for her too, always sort of being that default mediator. But yeah, it's interesting being a twin for sure.
Yeah, but blessed are the peacemakers.
Amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and is it true that with twins there are some kind of telekinesis, or where you can just kind of feel what the other one's feeling? Have you ever experienced that?
100%, several times. It happened more whenever we were children. I mean, I can give you all kinds of crazy stories. We could probably do a whole podcast episode just on being a twin. I think as you get older, and maybe I'm getting a little unscientific here, but my personal belief is that whenever we're young, I think that we're more inclined to the quote unquote spiritual world, because we don't have these, preconceived things that the world's telling us what's real, what's fake. Children just see things as they are. Yeah, like I just remember being a kid and being at home watching Saturday morning cartoons, and one particular moment, my sister was riding her bicycle and she was at least a quarter of a mile away, and I heard her crying in my head. And I go run to where she was, and she had fell, and she said, how did you know I was hurt? I said, well, I heard you. And she said, there's no way you could have heard me if you were at home. I said, well, I did.
Yeah.
So it's just stuff like that,
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is. And scientifically, we can't explain it. So growing up in the home, tell me about school, middle school, high school. Did you do very well? Was it hard for you?
My childhood was very interesting. It was a mix of all kinds of stuff. Both my parents came from extremely humble beginnings. My father he had 9 other siblings.
Oh, wow.
You could imagine how, money got stretched very tight. Him growing up, hard to get attention. And then his parents ended up divorcing. Same thing with my mom. Her parents divorced whenever she was a teenager. Her father was in the military. He actually got murdered by a neighbor after coming home from the war in some stupid argument over a dress that was being borrowed. It was a really silly thing, but it ended up in a tragedy. So she had been through a lot in her life. And then growing up, we were living like in a trailer park. It was kind of poverty. That didn't last too long because my father started his own business. He realized that he wasn't making enough doing what he was doing and started making pretty good money. But my father was also kind of cheap too. So we stayed in the bad neighborhood despite having enough money to move out. And I went to some schools that were pretty bad. And I was a minority too. I was like the token white kid in most of my classes. So I stood out like a sore thumb. And I also sort of developed late. I was a late bloomer. I don't think I didn't hit puberty till like my senior year in high school. I looked like I was 5 years, younger than what I was. And then suddenly my senior year in high school, I shot up and I was suddenly handsome. And I was like, why now? This should have happened sooner. Kids were constantly trying to fight me and pick on me. But luckily my older brother and my father were big into, martial arts and boxing. And then I sort of, looked after their interests and eventually got into that. And that's been huge, pivotal in my life as well. I really owe martial arts and boxing so much for just giving me coping skills and being strong. But it was also difficult because my father was a bit of a workaholic and I hardly saw the guy, because he grew up so poor, and his mindset, as long as he was putting food on the table, then he was the perfect father, because that was the number one problem for him growing up. And he wanted to solve that. So he had this insecurity about money. And no matter how much he made, no matter how much that savings account got built up, he had this anxiety about, losing it all, which ended up costing him his marriage in a lot of ways. And I think for me, I've never been diagnosed by a professional or gone to any kind of therapist or anything like that, but just through my own research and looking at things, I'm fairly certain that my attachment style is like a fearful, avoidant attachment style, because the whole time I was growing up, Because my parents both came from families of divorce, they were very adamant about making their marriage stay together and the kids growing up with both parents, no matter what. But you could tell that they weren't really happy with each other at the same time. So me and my twin sister, we would walk home from school because our school wasn't really that far away. And it was the 90s, parents didn't coddle us as much as they do nowadays. There was no cell phones. It's like, hey, you walk home and, God be willing. But my parents were breaking up, it seemed like once every 6 months. I would come home from school. Sometimes I would see my dad's stuff sitting in the front yard. And then he's living with, his sister for 2 weeks. And then I'm thinking, oh, my parents are getting divorced. Everything's going to change. And then suddenly he's coming back home. Oh, we've made up. We fixed things and he's back. And I'm like, oh, thank God. But then it kept happening over and over and over. And I think I developed this mindset of you've always got to have one foot in and one foot out because you'd never know. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, going to these schools, I had to, look over my shoulder a lot, walking home from school sometimes, even being in the bathroom. I remember one time being at a urinal doing my business and these group of guys, jumped me and beat me up and stole what was in my pockets. And then luckily when I got into martial arts, I learned how to protect myself, but I didn't win them all, but my win ratio did go up a little bit. And it took me years to kind of shake some of that off. I mean, I didn't go back to secondary school and higher education for some years because of those experiences in school. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a broad, doesn't tell you everything, but that kind of gives you a little bit of a broad spectrum of what I was dealing with in my, middle high school years.
So with a fearful avoidant attachment disorder, has that carried over into your adult life in that when something seems to be going good, you prepare yourself for it to fall apart?
Absolutely, 100%. There's been a lot of things that's happened to me in this last year, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But I want to say that this last year, a big part of my life has been sort of healing and unpacking a lot of that stuff, because something that I didn't realize was a lot of my romantic relationships haven't worked out in my life, and I could never figure out, why. And I think a lot of that has to do with that attachment mentality. Well, not even just in romantic relationships, but even in job opportunities, like if a manager is like saying, hey, you're doing a great job, we're thinking about giving you a promotion. I'm like, uh-oh, it's a trap. Mm-hmm. I have to look for, a way out. And sometimes that would cause me to self-sabotage opportunities. And I've only recently realized that I've been doing this. I sort of justified it by saying, I just have bad luck. But then I started getting honest with myself and saying, wait a second here. There's a pattern. And if there's a pattern, there has to be a method behind it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely carried over.
Yeah. And so you probably are the one in the relationship that says, I love you first and says it multiple times a day. Now you may not even realize it, but
well, maybe in the beginning, like I'm a kind of guy that when I fall for someone, I fall hard. But then once it gets to that point to where commitments are being discussed and it starts feeling like it could turn into something, permanent, that's when all of the demons come up.
Yeah,
exactly. And then once it's over, then I'll look back and regret and saying, wow, that was a great person that I was with. Why did I push them away? I find myself in this sort of bubble of loneliness that was self-caused, and it's a pattern that's happened a couple of times.
Yeah. Are you in a relationship now?
No, I just ended one a couple of months ago. The good part of it is the chronological timing of it is, for anybody listening. So about a year ago, I actually, survived a gun wound to the back of the head. And I was in a relationship with this woman at the time. We'd been dating off and on for a couple of years, actually. I was living outside of Nashville, maybe about an hour away. And I went to downtown Nashville to meet up with a friend, blow off some steam, whatever. And it started getting late. It was like around midnight. I said, oh man, I have to get back home. And as I'm walking back to my car, there's these group of guys holding Bibles, and they're claiming to be a part of this group called the Black Hebrew Israelites. and they believe that, white people and Asians can't go into heaven. At this time, really for the last couple of years, I haven't really been true to my faith. I've been kind of like a fair weathered believer, where it's just like, yeah, I go to church and I believe in God. And, if I mess up, he'll forgive me. Now I get to go live my life however I want. I see these guys, and I've always had a strong sense of justice, just growing up and being bullied. I hate bullies. And that's why I work in the legal system, currently. So whenever I see something that's totally injustice and something that I see that's just really out of order, I've always been called to do something. I'm not a guy that sits on the sidelines. So I walk up to these guys and we start trading these Bible verses. And I'm like, and we're trading all these Bible verses, and then someone gets mad in the audience and it starts getting really heated. You could feel the tension in the air, and someone pulls out a gun and starts shooting. 8 people get hit, me included. The first bullet that went off was the one that hit me. It just scraped the back of my head, put like a small cut on the back of my head. And they were holding this sign with all these like hateful things written on it. And the same bullet that scraped my head was the same bullet that hit their sign and put a hole in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. We all scattered like roaches. And after that happened, for about 2 weeks, I was cracking open the Bible, and I was reading. I was like, oh my God, this is such a huge revelation. And I started thinking about my spirituality and things. And the woman that I had been, dating for a long time, even at that point, we were sort of in a trial separation because we were having, rocky things dealing with commitment. So I went back to her and we sort of made up. And I kid you not, just days later, her father has to go to the hospital because he falls faint. He has really bad diabetes, and come to find out he also has COVID. I was really close to her. We're going to the hospital, and I actually moved in with her for a brief time because I was so worried about her being alone, and I was also roommating with someone else. And I was the last person that spoke to him. He died on Christmas Day in the morning, and I was video chatting with him the previous night, and I had to be the one to deliver the news to her that, hey, your father passed away. And that was a big blow to me. So in less than 1 month, I had 2 brushes with death right in my face. I started having all these narratives in my mind. Are you being trapped again? Are you making the wrong choices? This, and this. Eventually, make a long story short, me and this woman that I was dating, she was like, look, if you are so scared of commitment and all these kind of things, then, why are we together? And I care about you, but, you have to go. And initially it felt kind of relieving for maybe a month or 2, because I'm like, oh, the pressure's off of me. But then after the smoke clears, I'm not saying that she was perfect, but for the most part, this woman was a really good person to me. And I was like, man, I just kind of pushed away a person that was good to me just because I was afraid of all of these irrational fears. But it's only irrational once you're out of the situation. All these things would start coming back into my mind. What if we lose attraction for each other? What if we get married and a divorce happens? What if I, lose everything? Because my parents, when they divorced, it was an awful, awful divorce. Both of them didn't handle it in the best way, especially my father. I don't want to share too much detail because I want to respect their privacy, but my mom basically kind of went a little bit wild went out with her girlfriends and, going out on the nights and weekends and having fun. But my father just completely just went down this really dark path. And I pretty much had a non-existence relationship with him for about 10 years. I was actually married in my early 20s. And that ended in a divorce. And whenever we divorced, I happened to run into my father at a DMV, and I hadn't seen him really in, like I said, probably about 10 years. And I was like, Dad? And I just immediately told him, hey, I went through a divorce and I'm having money problems because of it. And apparently he was too. And I was like, well, do you have a job? And he's like, yeah. I was like, well, come move in with me. I need someone to help me pay bills. But once he moved in with me, then it was like, okay, we have to talk about the past here. You can't just be gone for 10 years and then we're just roommates. And it was one of the best experiences that ever happened to me. It was one of the wounds that did get healed. We talked, stayed up to 3:00 in the morning. And we did this for like days, just unpacking everything. And I really got to know him, and we lived together for about a year, and that wound got healed. And we have a pretty good relationship even to this day. It's only now that I've sort of realized, like, okay, I've had enough time on this earth to where I can look back and see patterns. And that's kind of the point where I'm at now, is just trying to unpack all of that, because trying to enter into relationships when all of your wounds haven't been healed is just a recipe for you bleeding all over innocent people and getting their white t-shirts dirty, in a sense. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah. So in thinking about this, there's a psychological term that I use that most wouldn't, but it's called value processing. And I believe that happens between the ages of like 7 to 13. And during that time, we learn who we are by the people around us and how they treat us. That's how we become to value who we are. And so during that time, you have this unstable home life of back and forth and unsure, and even in the bullying and in school, you have all of that combined together. And so you carry that's what molds your personality, or in your case, puts together that fearful avoidant attachment style. And the only way to change that personality, otherwise you would just have to cope. You'd have to find your coping mechanisms to deal with those styles. But the only way to change it is to have a major traumatic life event. Getting shot in the back of the head is a major traumatic life event. Having to lose someone that you're close to, that is your girlfriend's father, is a major traumatic life event. And so it can reshape us and remold us into a different type of personality, and mold us into how we receive love differently and how we communicate differently. What sounds like has happened here, going out on a limb, is that when you were in your accident, and then when your girlfriend's father passed, you began to transition into a personality that was different. And all of a sudden you weren't the same person that she had loved or had fell in love with. And either that, or you began to self-sabotage the relationship because you felt like things were changing and you were not in control anymore.
I think it's more closer to the second one. And then two, I mean, we broke up around July. And, during this time, I haven't been dating anybody else or anything. And that's been a very conscious decision. As much as it's been hard, because I'm a very social person, I made a conscious effort that, you know what, I'm not going to try to look for some kind of rebound. I'm not going to go in some bar and try to, drink my pain away. I'm not going to go to my boxing gym and just, work out every day and make myself really tired so I don't think about it. I'm going to deal with this. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 months. And that's what's led me back to my faith in large part. Is I'm like, okay, God, I did this back in August. I went down to my knees and just, I had a good cry, and I just confessed all my sins to God. Everything that I've ever said or done in my life that I could remember that I felt guilty about, I confessed it. And I was like, look, everything in the world is temporary. And the only relationship in my life that has felt permanent was a relationship with a higher power, a God. That's been very helpful for me. And I also wrote a book, and it's called The Ninja Mindset, Awaken the Warrior Within. Like, it sounds cool, but I sort of go through my mental process in this book, sort of relaying the lessons that I've learned in boxing and martial arts, like being in the ring and taking those punches, and just realizing that just because you're losing in this round doesn't mean that you can't, win later on. And then throughout writing that book and getting out some of my emotions, getting back into scriptures, and then also coming across something known as post-traumatic growth. I uncovered this, and this is, pretty controversial amongst some psychologists and things. And I learned, according to some studies, that something like approximately 12 to 13% of people, after a traumatic experience happens, some people actually come out the other side stronger and better. And the key part of it is self-authoring. Like, what story are you telling yourself in conjunction with your tragedy. So what I had been doing in my life is every breakup that's happened or every tragedy that's happened in my life, I try to lawyer the situation in such a way to where it wasn't my fault. And then I sort of reauthored those situations and looking back, and I'm like, okay, where did I contribute to this train wreck that happened? What part did I play? And once I started doing that, that's when I've been able to start pinpointing some of these things. And I talked to my father a little bit about this, and he gave me a really quick, simple analogy. And he said, hey, have you ever heard the story of the man in the yellow cab? And I was like, no. So he's like, there's this guy who gets into a taxi and they get into a car crash. He nearly dies. And once he recovers, he doesn't have a car himself, so he relies on a taxi to get around town. But the problem is now he's afraid of yellow taxis. Every yellow taxi looks like it's a death machine. So he's forced to walk everywhere he goes just because he hasn't got over that experience. So my dad asked me, he's like, well, what are the yellow taxis in your life? Because they're not all bad. They're not all going to crash. That's sort of what led me to you. You know, we have a mutual friend and Pastor Broom. He said, man, I think you need to talk to this guy here, and he might have some interesting things to say for you. So I'm definitely on a journey. I'm ready to heal. And I feel that I'm a smart guy and I have a lot to offer, but I don't want to hurt anybody else because of the wounds that I'm having. I don't want to be that classic story anymore of hurt people, because I know deep down inside, I'm a lot better than that.
Yeah. So touching on post-traumatic growth, or PTG, it is very controversial within the psychology world because sometimes PTG can be confused with resilience. Clinically speaking, it's a different construct. PTG is sometimes considered resilience because this post-traumatic issue is causing, or the result of this struggle, this trauma, causes you to grow. But resiliency is the personal ability to bounce back. But post-traumatic growth refers to what happens when someone has difficulty bouncing back and they experience this traumatic event that challenges their core belief. So they endure this psychological struggle, even mental illness or a PTSD issue, and then ultimately they find this sense of personal growth. And it's a process that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of struggle. And so someone who may already be very resilient when trauma occurs, they don't always experience that because that person isn't rocked to the core, if you will, by the event. And so less resilient people may go through the distress and the confusion as they try to understand what this terrible thing that happened to them, what it was and what it means to them. The issue then lies of, are we really just becoming more resilient, or are we actually growing due to the trauma? Either way that you want to put that, you're still growing, you're still moving forward, but it's within the construct of, what are we going to call it? What are we going to do?
Well, something else I want to add on too is I like your distinction, because I know people who went through so many difficult things in their life and they're very resilient, but they're not necessarily better because of that resilience. Like they've gotten tougher, but you can tell that deep down inside that they're not necessarily, happier or changed for it. Whereas with the term post-traumatic growth, not only are you tougher and more resilient, but you've also, transformed into something new, or at least that's the way that I sort of take it.
Sure.
I think there is a bit of a distinction there.
So I think that we could, putting this into a martial arts type of scenario here, which I'm a 5th degree black belt in Aikido. So what do you do?
I'm sort of a martial arts junkie, but growing up, initially, it was just like straight like American kickboxing and like Wing Chun Kung Fu, if you ever heard of that. That was sort of like my base I'm like that Bruce Lee mindset. I've sort of dipped my toes in a lot of stuff, but,
Gotcha.
but yeah.
I
And I've
used
done
to
a little bit of Aikido, some wrist locks.
I used to say I know judo because you don't know that I've got a knife and you don't know that I've got a gun. And
Oh man, brother.
yeah. So within a martial arts look here, when you do your different moves, okay, say that you do something incorrectly and you take a hit, you have the resiliency to keep going, but you're still bleeding, you're still hurting, but you keep moving. It doesn't shut you down. The difference is that while you may be resilient, have you grown? Have you learned in that place of how to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And that really is the construct of PTG of, okay, is this resilience or is there actual growth?
I love your analogy, and you just summed it up perfectly. It's like, I can't tell you how many times, I actually work part-time as a boxing coach now. I see a lot of students all the time that are really tough. They can take 10 punches to the head and they keep charging forward. And I'm like, hey, that's great that you're so tough and determined. But haven't you ever thought to move your head out of the way and avoid that punch instead?
Sure.
So it's like, that's a really great analogy. Yes, getting tougher is good and developing that thick skin, but if there's not a lesson that sinks in behind it, you're just building up a callus that really didn't have to be there to begin with.
Yeah. So then the idea comes from, well, isn't this all just coping mechanisms? We are resilient, but we learn to block the shot or to move our head, as you said. But is that not just a coping mechanism? And so that's where psychology gets kind of bent on each other of, what are we going to call it? Is this post-traumatic growth or is this coping? So, it really is just in the psychology world, we're big on what things are called, and they're called that for a reason. And so it kind of gets a little muddy water there. Okay, so I wanted to go back a step. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm a pastor. I pastor a church here in North Little Rock, and I've been in full-time ministry for about 15 years now, and I do this full-time too, in mental health work. And so I want to get back to the point of, with you knowing that, of where you said that you really begin to pull away and lean into your faith. Now, as a pastor, I'm going to tell you that's great. You need to. As a therapist, I'm going to tell you is that, yes, you need to lean into your faith, but you're still bleeding. You're still hurting. And so a lot of times what we can do is here's a bad analogy for you. We can put the faith Band-Aid on it, but we're really not letting it heal because we're trying to cover it up with something else. It works for a while. It gets you through. But at some point in time, you're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and let it air out in order to heal. And so as you said, you went to the altar, you prayed, you cried, and yeah, there's something that I can't even explain about what happens when you cry. George Yance once said, if the eyes will leak, the head won't swell. And so, there is just something about that, but there's also something about saying out loud, this is where I'm at. I don't understand why I'm here, but this is where I'm at. And whether it's that you do that within your faith, or whether that's you do that with a therapist or a family member, someone that you trust, there still has to come that realization that, hey, this is real, not that God isn't real, not that our spirituality or our faith isn't real, but this is real life right here in front of me, and I've got to do something about it. I think about, and I'm not trying to diss any type of religion, because that would be the last thing that I'd want to do. But I think about these snake handling churches, up in Kentucky and Virginia area, where
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So they believe that, as Scripture says, they can take up serpents, and if they have faith that they won't be bit. Well, when they are bit, they don't go to the hospital because that would be a lack of faith, and then they die like idiots. They die. And so a lot of times, if we're not careful, we will let our faith cover up physical things. And we do that so much in mental health. It is, I see it so much. It's on a scale that is concerning. Now, once again, I'm a pastor, and yes, we need to lean into our faith, and yes, we have to be there. But have you experienced, even in these times where your faith is on point, that you still have this guilt or this shame or this thought process of, why is this happening? Why did I waste this part of my life? Why is there that realization of the actuality of reality in front of you?
100%. And everything that you said, I'm I'm normally so much more talkative, but I'm really just soaking up and learning from you. I'm right now probably more heavy in my faith than I've been in probably, 15 years. Whenever I was in middle school and high school, I was super religious. I was kind of like a Bible nerd when I was in high school and stuff. But then after I got out of high school, I started, worrying more about, the world and things. But I know exactly what you're talking about, because even though developing a relationship with a God, a higher power, something that's permanent and infinite and never going to leave me, gives me a great sense of comfort. I'd be a liar if I said that I was one of these people who just said, oh yeah, I came to God and got baptized and everything fell off of me, and then I'm cured of every negative thought. If that's happened to someone out there, then hey, kudos to you. But that hasn't been the case for me. There has been some healing, but I still find myself, kind of metaphorically punching myself in the head and saying, man, like, why did you screw up that amazing opportunity? Or, like, what have you been doing for the past couple of years? Like, you could have been doing this and this. And there's still a lot of those conversations that float around in my head.
How much guilt or shame do you feel in your everyday life?
Well, I mean, it's hard to put a number or anything on it. That's a very difficult question. On one hand, I mean, it's just like this last relationship that I was in. She was a really great woman. I'm not going to say that she was perfect, but for anyone who's in their 20s or 30s, we know how crazy the dating world is out there right now, with all the sexual immorality, the drug use, all those kind of things. And this particular girl didn't, have those kind of issues. And, she was definitely a pearl among dirty rocks out there. And if I just sit here and just really, think hard on it, I mean, I can think myself into a depression, but then at the same time, it's like yesterday is gone and I can't necessarily live there. So I don't want to say that I had this catatonic level of guilt to where I'm thinking about jumping off my house. On a daily basis, I do get those occasional little, ticks if I'm out in public. If I see a couple holding hands, or if I see a happy family, I might think back to my childhood. So I do get those little glimpses, those little flashes. They do exist.
Mm-hmm. And do you know why they exist?
Whoa. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. Why do those feelings? Okay, I have an answer for you. Because I know deep down in my heart of hearts, between me and God, I know the good that I've done in the world. And I know that I possess a lot of great talents and I've helped a lot of people. And the stupid things that I've done in my life, I just know in hindsight that I'm better than that. I view myself as a luxury sports vehicle, and I just lost a race to a 1990 Honda Civic. That's the way that I look at these situations. Where it's like, dude, you're better than that. Like, did you really just let that happen? And you have to, wrestle with those regrets from the past, and then looking forward to what may or may not come in the future, but still being together enough to take care of your responsibilities in the now.
That's a great answer, but it's not the right answer.
Okay, I'm listening.
So the reason that you get those guilt and shame issues and times is because of the fearful avoidant attachment, even within yourself. You continue to remind yourself that oh, because of this, then I have this guilt, I have this shame, I'm not ever going to make anything of myself. It's all going to fall apart at some point in time. And yeah, I am the sports car who just lost to a Honda Civic, but I'm a sports car, but I lost. It's that constant of, okay, this happened, so now it's all going to fall apart. And that's the world, the mindset that you're sitting in. The answer to that is to realize that there is more to life than just failing. There is more to life than just winning. Sometimes we have to understand it's not about losing, it's not about winning, it's about living. And if we are constantly in that guilt and shame mindset and constantly in that, well, yeah, this is going good, so it's about to all fall apart mindset, then we're not living. And so what you have to do is learn to live in the now. And you can do that spiritually. You can do that. That's how we walk by faith and not by sight. We do that. But to walk by faith is a very scary thing to do, because that doesn't leave any room for us to doubt, because we're not walking in our own, we're walking in Him.
It's really crazy. Some of the things that you're saying are so pertinent to some of the conversations that I've had with friends and family members, and especially my renewed relationship with my father, because he's also has a fearful, avoidant, kind of personality. I always told myself, I promised that I'm not going to become my father, and I did, because that's what led to my parents' divorce. Is my dad always had one foot in and one foot out all the time, and that's probably because of his childhood. Well, probably it is, because some of the things that he told me was much more difficult than what I had went through. And he's going through his healing process at the age of, he's like 62. And only in the last couple of years has he had some, normalization in his life. And I don't want to wait until I'm 60 to start, letting go of things. But something that he said, kind of helped me is, if you do everything that you're supposed to do and you handle your side of the deal, if that other side messes up, yeah, it's going to be painful, but you get to be guilt-free. You're not God, so you can't make a prenuptial agreement with success and failure.
Yeah. But while you are guilt-free and you know that you've done everything right, your mind is still going to tell you that you did something wrong.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. And so you've got to learn to tell your mind that you did everything that you could do right.
The thing that I couldn't understand about myself was that even in this last relationship, I haven't had like this huge, extensive, dating history. I'm not, Mr. Mac out here or anything. Like in this last relationship with this decent woman, it was very strange, because it was like the closer that she got to me, the more I was taking steps back. Mm-hmm. But then whenever she would get fed up and she took a step back, then I find myself longing to, reel it back in. And it just seems so silly. It's very counterintuitive. And that's what I'm trying to figure out is, where does this mindset stem from? And it's so illogical. It's almost like someone who's hungry, but they're afraid to eat. And then once they're presented with that food, they don't want it. But then whenever it's taken away, they realize how hungry they are. It's very illogical.
Mm-hmm. Well, it comes from the childhood trauma. That's where it all stems from. And until you work through that, then unless you develop unhealthy coping skills, then it's always going to be there.
Is this something that you've heard of before with other patients?
Man, let me tell you.
Is this fairly common?
It's not uncommon at all. And just from the world we live in, that's where we're at. The reason that we back away is because we don't want to be hurt. But the reason that we pull towards them when they start backing away is because we don't want them to hurt. And so it's this constant tug of war. If I were to say, okay, Randall, I'm going to send you $50, you're probably going to, in the back of your mind, going, okay, what does Doc Brian want from me? What is he setting me up for?
Absolutely.
So when you get into a relationship, even though you really do like that person, when they start treating you with love and respect, you are predisposed to say, okay, what are they trying to box me in for? Instead of just letting them love you.
Yeah.
But here's what you do. Tell them, I don't know why you would want to love me. I'm not used to this. I'm probably going to pull away, but I need you to understand that it has nothing to do with you. And on the front side of that relationship, you have lost control because you have told them it's nothing to do with them. It's all me. So then if you lose, you already knew you were going to lose. And so it's not about losing, it's about winning.
It's about being able to control the outcome, even if it's a negative outcome. You knew it was coming, and that gives you a sense of control.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But you don't let that control get to a point of where you're controlling everything in the relationship, though.
Yeah. I've never been someone that was like been physically abusive or anything. That's never been any kind of issue or nothing. I would say like the only negative or toxic thing that I've done in a relationship, aside from sort of that tug of war of hot and cold and the distance thing, is whenever we meet here in the middle, we have some very beautiful, moments, but it's only when those conversations happen about like, oh, hey, we've been together for a little while. Like, what do you think about marriage? What do you think about kids? And that's when all of the anxiety comes up. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that in 6 months. Let me kick it down the road. And sometimes I would even find myself, and it's pretty embarrassing to, admit it, but, it's not just for me, but, for any listeners out there. But I mean, I consider myself an ethical person and everything, but sometimes I would find myself, let me, talk to this secretary or this attractive person and, flirt with them a little bit, even if I don't intend to be unfaithful, but just to remind myself that in case things don't work out, I'm still desirable. Mm-hmm. Like, I can still fall somewhere.
That's self-sabotage, 100%. Yeah. That's okay. Well, at least if I'm going to fall, I have somewhere to fall to.
Yeah. But then at the same time, this person's trying to love me and I don't have to fall anywhere. Mm-hmm. But I've convinced myself that this thing is not going to work anyways in the end, but I also don't want it to leave me at the same time. It's just talking about it in this logical fashion. For anyone on the outside watching this conversation, it looks silly because it is silly. To put it bluntly, it feels like there's always two armies sort of, fighting right here for, are you going to turn left? Or are you going to turn right? Well, or I shouldn't say two armies, but I should say a prosecutor and a defendant arguing a case constantly in my head about which decision should you go. And it reminds me of this Russian proverb that says, if you chase two rabbits, you lose them both. And that's happened to me so many times in life where I have my mind on all of these exit strategies, and then I end up in a position where, now there's no options because they've all gotten fed up with me with this deliberating that they've moved on.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Gary V. You know who Gary V is?
Oh yeah. I like Gary V.
Gary V is the one that said, if you have a plan B, you've already failed.
Hence why some people end up not getting married once they discuss the prenuptial agreement. And this is a monkey wrench too that we haven't even discussed, which could be another trigger or complicated part in this whole dialogue, is my profession. I've worked as a paralegal, and I've done private investigative work for the last, 8 years. I've been to, I can't tell you how many documents that I've written up for divorce. I've done prenuptial agreements. I've sat down with couples. I've watched hundreds of relationships get destroyed right in front of me, and then I'm getting paid to defend one party over the other. So I have all of these real life examples playing out in my head also. And even though I enjoy the work, at the same time, it's kind of like experience is good, but sometimes you can see so much to where it clouds your own reality. Just because it's those people's realities doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be you. And something that I've been learning to do is, well, even though you've handled all of these divorce cases as a paralegal and you've done investigative work and you've seen the ugliest of societies, I've been trying to reprogram my brain to think about those cases where the couples did reconcile and there was a happy ending, or I was investigating someone who was accused of all these horrible things and turned to find out he was completely innocent and he was a really good guy. For every story that's out there about how horrible it is to be married or how horrible this restaurant is, there's another review that says this is the best place I've ever eaten.
Yeah, and so what you have done is you've built walls around your heart to protect you from being hurt, but it's those same walls that are keeping you from being loved.
100%.
Yeah, so if you were a cardiologist and your father came in with a heart attack and needed quadruple bypass surgery, and you could do it, would you? Or would you defer it to someone else who is as qualified or better qualified than you are?
Wow.
And that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. You're looking at this and saying, okay, I want a relationship, but I'm really close to how all of this is going to go wrong.
Mm.
And so I can't have a successful relationship because I am staying put on how it's all going to fall apart. And so some way or another, you're going to have to disassociate work life from personal life. You're going to have to be one person at work and another person at home.
In some ways, I kind of regret bringing it up because I don't think it's the primary source. I really think that the primary source is what I directly experienced in childhood, but I'd be a liar if I said that the things that I've seen in my work didn't contribute to it.
Oh, yeah, I would agree that it was the things in your childhood that are causing the basis of all of this, but what is happening is not helping. You know, everything that you're seeing is not helping.
It's reinforcing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the things that I went through in my childhood was like the original wound, and then seeing all these other examples in my work life is kind of like adding in, you know, reinforcement, like, yep, you know.
And how many people do you go out on a date on and you do a background check or you look into them before you even go on the first date?
Oh, 100%. I don't do that. It's unethical. But now,
well, maybe not an official background check, but social media.
Like looking at their Facebook or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not like initially. I mean, because like I said, you know, I'm not some, you know, Mac that's going out on a date every weekend. I don't have this huge dating, you know, history. But like even this relationship that I was in, I mean, yeah, sometimes I would find myself, you know, maybe analyzing a social media post a little bit too much, or like, oh, you know, who's this guy that liked this post, or, you know, what did he mean by this, or, you know, what did he mean by that, and then trying to look for things to reinforce what I already believe about the world.
Yeah, you said it. Trying to look for things. You've got to turn that off, because when you look for things, you're going to find them.
That's true.
It's kind of the old adage, if you think your partner is cheating and you ask them to go through their phone, you're going to find something that makes you feel like you had the legitimate right to look.
That's true.
Because if you look, you're going to find something.
If you think someone's cheating on you, or you think that someone's out to get you, you could pretty much construe any sort of innocent comment and twist it and do this mental gymnastics in your head to where it has to mean this thing to verify your worldview so that you can say, ha, I knew I was right.
Yeah. Well, being in the legal system, you would know that one of the hardest things to prove is intent.
That is true.
And why is it hard to prove?
Because we're not psychics. We're not mind readers.
But in relationships, we want to sit down and say, oh, this is what you meant by this, or this was your intent. But we can't even prove that beyond a reasonable doubt in a legal system. So what makes you think we can do that in relationships? And
I guess also, too, I have to consider the alternative. Yes, I'm protecting myself because I no longer have this responsibility of this promotion or this relationship or whatever. But the alternative of it is that, oh, now you have to be back into this space where you don't have this emotional support. You don't have this person in your life anymore. I know that we've been talking about romance and different things a lot, but even in business. So I've written several books and things, and I've opened up martial art gyms and things like that. And I've had friends, close friends, try to invest in me and sign contracts and try to build something. Like one of my good friends, he's an expert marketer, and he's like, man, you are so smart, you have so much knowledge, I could promote you and just help you just take off. And I think that he's telling the truth. And I've been friends with him for 5-6 years. But then that thing activates. Well, what if we end up becoming enemies and I have to sue him?
Mm-hmm. Or does he really think this, or is he trying to market me and sell me into doing something?
Exactly. And then it goes down this whole rabbit hole. Let's talk about it maybe around the summertime. And then the person gets fed up and they're like, I'm out of here. And then I get mad and say, oh man, why is this person gone now?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. I have kind of a general rule, and that is, 1, if you don't know what to do, do nothing. And 2, if after 24 hours you still don't know what to do, try to figure out what would be the best for you. Not put in all these scenarios, but what is the right now. And even in relationships, we may just have to get down and say, okay, business-wise, what makes the most sense? And then once you determine what that is, ask 2 to 3 of your closest friends who you trust what their response would be. And if your response matches theirs, do it. Because then you don't have to self-sabotage. You can blame it on them. That you were all in consensus. So it wasn't you that failed. It was us that failed.
I like that.
And so, but it still gives you the ownership in it. It still gives you, you are the one at the end of the day that made the decision, but you made the decision based on everybody else's input. But then there are going to be those times where you just got to pull the trigger and you just got to do it and live very intentionally. And someone in your sense of an attachment disorder, you may just have to start looking at life as a business. What makes sense in the here and now? And quit kicking things down the road. If you want to kick something down the road, put a date and a time to when you're going to revisit it. And that way you're not just intentionally saying, I'm not going to deal with this right now, so let's kick it on down the road. Be very intentional. If you're in a relationship and she starts talking about marriage, say something to the effect of, I don't know that I'm there yet. Can we revisit this in 3 months or 6 months? Or, but be intentional, but be honest too. Don't say, I don't think that I'm ready for that. And so you're probably going to break up with me now because you want that. And, don't be that self-sabotage. Be very intentional, live in the moment and move forward. I have a deacon here at the church. He's 90 years old. And one of the best pieces of advice, he had 2 pieces of advice he's given me that have just been golden. The first one was, don't ever outrun your blockers.
Expound upon that.
If you are the quarterback and you are taking down the field because you, in a quarterback rush, you have got clear, don't ever outrun your people around you who are going to protect you. So don't get ahead of yourself. Don't try to force things. Just let it happen. Let it happen naturally. The second thing that he tells me is never trip on a log behind you. And that's where that self-doubt and that guilt and that shame, all of that come in, because that was back then. That's not today. That was a week ago. And I don't have time to think about that because I've got to deal with what I'm dealing about today.
I think something that you said earlier when you said, be honest about how you're feeling. That's something that I definitely didn't do, even in this relationship, where I might briefly expound upon it, but I didn't specifically tell this person, hey, this is exactly what I'm afraid of. Can you address it for me?
Yeah.
Instead, I would just sort of continue the prosecutor versus defendant in my own head, and then maybe make some passing comments or maybe drop a hint or something, but then pretty much left it all on myself. So she's on the outside living her life, and hey, I'm treating this guy nicely, like what's his problem? And then meanwhile, I'm having like a whole college dissertation going down in my brain when I could have just sat her down and just said, hey, these are the fears that I'm having, and I want you to address them from your standpoint.
And so when you don't do that and you self-sabotage the relationship, she's left thinking that she did something wrong.
And that's where some extra guilt comes in too, because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Whether we end up reconciling, which is probably less than 1%, but or she goes into a future relationship, whatever. There's a good chance that putting her through that hot and cold and back and forth could affect her in the future.
There's not a could, there is a is and will.
And that makes me feel awful.
Well, there's a way to fix it.
How so?
Call her and be honest.
Or at least write a letter.
At least write a letter. Yeah.
Two major things that I've pulled away so far in this conversation is I like your idea about having a counsel. Like whenever I'm making these huge life-changing decisions, taking, my closest, 3 or so friends or family members and making sort of a group think decision. And then, ultimately it's left on my shoulders and I pull the trigger, and whether it works out or not. And it's like, well, we were kind of all in this. And that kind of gives me some more confidence and ideas to think future problems out through. And then secondly, the forgiveness part about reaching out to people that you've hurt and doing what you can to sort of explain the situation in order to free yourself and to free them, because I don't want to send or leave behind another broken person to potentially break someone else or to be taken advantage of. That's what seems to happen with broken people, is that they continue going on hurting other people, or they continue going on being the victim. And I don't want that life path for anybody.
Yeah. What you're going to have to realize, though, is that while you do give that explanation to them, you give it and you leave it. It's not your job to make them understand it.
I'm glad that you said that, because I can pretty much guarantee that the message will be received and read, but I can't mess with people's free will, and I can't force them to digest it or digest it in a way that is palatable to me. It has to be left into the chance at that point. But at least I can hold on to something saying that, well, I tried to make some sort of rectification happen. And that says something about my character if I'm willing to do that.
Well, it goes back to the old adage of, if you hurt me and you ask me for forgiveness, is it on you whether or not I forgive you or not? Or is that on me?
It's like the other old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink it.
Yeah.
And not everyone wants to accept that, It's like, hey, I've prepared this food for you. You have to eat it, right? No, they don't. But the gesture was at least made.
Well, and it's for you, not for them.
For self-healing. No matter what happens, if I do enter, let's say that I entered into a new relationship, 2 or 3 years from now, I most certainly don't want to carry any of those same baggages and then have to do this whole process over again.
Yeah. Yeah. So for you, there's going to be two key things, is that you've got to be honest with yourself and those around you, even when it hurts. And you've got to be very intentional in everything that you do. And those are the two things that are going to help you to cope with this fearful avoidant attachment disorder. Well, Randall, it's been good to have you on Doc Talks today. I appreciate you, and I hope giving you a little bit of enlightenment here of some things to at least try.
Absolutely. You've given me at least 2 or 3 things that, after we end this conversation, I'm going to go write down and start trying to, actively put it into practice. I'm going to continue, talking to my mentors, and yeah, putting these things into application and not just saying, oh, that was an interesting conversation that I had with Doc Brian. Now I'm going to go back to, doing what I've been doing. Whew, there was a couple of times in this conversation where it's like, oh, gut punch, let me hold it together. But I needed that.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. And while this was not therapy, I want to be very clear about that. Therapy in and of itself is traumatic. Don't let our conversation here send you into a spiral of guilt and shame and all that kind of stuff.
This was just a friendly conversation.
Now you're saying that, but is that how you really feel about it?
Well, we're kind of playing semantics because, and the reason why I say that is something that you say to somebody in passing. There's been stories that I've heard of people, saying like, oh, I was ready to commit suicide, but then someone said I had, nice shoes that day, and it stopped me. So is anything really trivial?
No. But with you, you've got to be intentional.
Okay. Now you're telling. Well, I view this conversation as a meeting of the minds.
Sounds good to me. Where can our listeners find you if they wanted to get in contact with you?
Very easily, you can just, Google my name, Randell Stroud, and I promise that I'm not totally crazy. I have some parts of me that are together. I was very vulnerable in this conversation, but yeah, I've written all kinds of books on martial arts, the legal system. One of my big passions is teaching people just the basics about the legal system. I think that sort of knowing the basic standards on how to write a legal motion or just what your basic rights are is on par nowadays with learning how to change a tire. And of course, boxing and martial arts been huge therapy in my life. So the legal system, boxing, martial arts, these are things I've written about extensively. Those areas I'm very good at. And just as you've shared some of your expertise with me, anyone who's interested in these topics, reach out to me and I'll try to teach you everything that I know about it and encourage you if you're interested.
All right. We'll make sure to put some kind of contact to you in the description of this podcast. Of course, I've been Doc Brian. This is Doc Talks. You can find all of my social media at the bottom of my webpage of thedocbrian.com. Doc Talks is a part of the Be Frank Network. Check out all of our podcasts there at befranknetwork.com. Randall, once again, thank you so much for being here with us today.
God bless you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later.